Yeah, my name's Brett Palmer. I started off working at Novell, and the other thing I help with is I heard you guys talking about DevOps. I also wanted to volunteer for DevOps Days, so I brought some coupons for DevOps Days. It's come up in May. They also have diversity scholarships. We're trying to get more women to come. It's mostly men that go to those, but it is. I don't know if you know anything about DevOps.
2 or 3 days. When is it?
It's like 2 days. It's in May. I've got a little overhead. I'll show.
Yeah.
I'm going to use my own Wi-Fi. I hope it works. But if you're not familiar with DevOps, and really the presentation I'm giving with Ionic Pro is really all DevOps. I mean, what they built was it's development and operations. And here in the Valley, it's a really hot market now. So, and I'm a developer, kind of got into DevOps out of necessity, and I manage an infrastructure team for the state of Utah. And what I try to tell developers, because I think it's much easier for developers to transition into DevOps than sysadmins into DevOps, because you really need some programming skills. And so what I try to encourage people is, if you want to be, a small fish in a big pond, or in a big, big ocean, that's like developers. If you want to be a big fish in a small pond, I say that's like DevOps. Lots of opportunities. But Todd and I, we both, at Novell, we were in a testing organization, engineering though, so we wrote programs and development, and I'll always be grateful for that because it's right out of school. And I got to write all kinds of programs based on, what I wanted to learn and what I wanted to do. And I didn't really have to meet product requirements of it's got to look like this, and it's got to look like this. DevOps has a lot of those things, a lot of freedom to do things. So I try to encourage developers to go. Let's see if I've got my connection. And my presentation's in Google Docs, so I need that.
I don't know if you need to try my hotspot.
Is someone going to be paying this so I don't throw away?
Come on, go, go, go. It's loading, it's loading.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so quick, I'll just do this pitch for DevOps Days. Here's the information. I've got cards here too. It's 2 days. It's in May. It's a local event. Have lots of the companies that come around here. It's at Noah's. That's the discount code that's on here as well. Lots of really good workshops. It's kind of like a really big meetup, so we break up into. And I've got these stickers have the same coupon code. If
We'll post everything on the meetup
and
notes.
if you're interested, the women in the room, if you want diversity scholarships, it's like only $30. So I don't have the coupon, but let me know and I can get it to you. So anyway, I encourage everyone to come. It was a lot of fun.
So it's $150 normally, right? I'm just saying that because most conferences are like $1,500. It's actually
Oh,
really
yeah.
cheap to go.
Yeah, I think it's like $300.
Okay.
But
It's still-
yeah, it's a lot cheaper. It's not like a regular comp. It's not $1,000. And we have scholarships. What?
Coupon.
Oh, I think that's like 30% off. Or 15% off.
It was great last year. It was really good.
Yeah, so it's a good conference. Swag's good. I'm in charge of the swag, so it's like my Christmas list. I get all the things I like, Xbox One, Atari, stuff like that. So it should be fun. Okay. Now to the presentation. I'll try to go through these slides. So this is really on Ionic Pro. It's a new service from Ionic. I was skeptical at first because it's a paid service, but it's really not that expensive. And it solves a lot of the problems that you have when it gets to deploying and testing and those kinds of things. They really have done a good job with this. So they had a previous one called Ionic Cloud Services. That's been deprecated, and now they have Ionic Pro. Price is about the same. But mostly it improves development and deployment and testing. So I'll get into like how it uses a Git repo and some of the best practices for that. So it's standard. It follows a standard industry workflow. If you're ever on GitHub and know how to work with Git, it follows that. Allows you to do automated builds in the cloud. So in the past, if you wanted to write an iOS app, you had to have a Mac. So you really couldn't get away with it. And you probably should still have a Mac. But if you didn't have a Mac, you could you can do your builds in the cloud. Improves development and beta testing. And then one of the frustrations I have is just getting your app in the App Store. If you've ever tried to publish something to the Apple Store, Android's not as bad, but Apple Store is pretty finicky about everything and getting that all right. It seems like I'm spending all my time just getting the build and deploying.
And you gotta wait a week or two.
Yeah, and then you wait. This makes it a lot easier to do. We won't get into too many of the specifics of that, but that's one of the goals. So the development workflow uses Git at Ionic that integrates with Git version control to manage builds and releases. But that doesn't. You should still have your own Git repo for your own code. So it's not like a replacement for your own GitHub account or a Bitbucket account. But you can integrate it with yours. So here's an example of how it would work. So in the bottom, you have your own Git repo. And this might be a typical, you have your master branch at the top, you have a development branch, and then maybe you have some feature branches, and you're working along the way. And then what you do is you add the Ionic master to your branch. And you can create other branches, but master is by default there.
So you had a branch called Ionic Master?
Well, it's actually when you create, so you'll register with Ionic Pro and they'll give you an app ID. And that app ID has a master branch. And then you configure your own Git repo, you'll add that repo to yours.
And so when you push to master, it'll sync.
Right, so when you're ready to test it, you work in, like I work on a development branch. I use the Git workflow.
So it's a remote. It's a Git remote.
Yeah, so it's a Git remote. So I make a call, say, okay, I'm ready, I'm going to push this, I'm ready to start testing. I do a Git push Ionic master, and it pushes it up to this Ionic master branch. And then that automatically kicks off a build. We'll talk about that. So then the build process is triggered by that push. Automatically with Ionic master, it'll create a build using the scripts that you've included in your repo. And essentially, you can use other branches if you want to. If you want to, have more feature branches and test them differently. And you can also customize the branch. So essentially, when it runs a build, it just runs npm run build with these scripts. But you could add your own scripts and own custom things if you wanted to do some things. Okay. And then it has a concept called channels. So channels are really they're tied to a build, and they're connected to testers and users that you want to use your app. And you can change them, they're not fixed, so you can move it to a different build. But it's a great way to share your app with their tool called Ionic View. If you want to just push some changes out, say like your beta testers. And that would all be automatic. Like, so I did a build today, and I got an email saying, hey, there's a new build for this particular application. You can test it in Ionic View. So pretty cool process. And deployments through other channels or manual, that pushes them out to, well, we'll get into that. But the master one is automatically, and it triggers off that master branch. So here's an example of kind of what the dashboard, if you go to Ionic build, you're going to have your application, your app code, your application ID, and here would be like, here's your builds, and here's the channels. So, and we'll talk about the channel. The channel master would be for testing, and production would be like to push to the App Store.
Are these like NPM channels?
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know how they implemented it. So here's kind of a drawing of the flow. So you do your master build. You push to the master branch. A build takes place, and it automatically gets deployed to the channel, and notifies all your users on that channel, saying here's a new app. And they can go and start using that application on their device. And if you want it similarly with production, if you pushed it to like the production channel, you could manually push, okay, I'm ready to push it to the App Store, to the Apple Store, or to the Android, to the Google Store, push that, and all that would be done. Or like right now, I have to bring up Xcode on my Mac and do a build and all that stuff and push it up there, and then I do the same thing with the Android, and I've got like a list of 10,000 steps. I mean, the first time to figure that all out, you kind of have to get an advanced degree to get it to work. And so I go through those steps all the time. This will be a much better process going forward.
When you say it notifies beta testers, where's that list of beta testers at?
So
Email they get, or?
yeah, like I got it on email, but when you set up the channels, you can add the testers that you want.
So you add them in Ionic.
Yeah, well, you add them in the dashboard to the channel. But since I'm the owner of the channel, I get them anyway. But you could add other. It's a little like test flight on Apple. If you're same thing when you push those, it works a lot the same way. But I think this is much easier because now it doesn't matter if they're iOS or Android; they all get it, and you don't have to really deal with the Apple Store. Okay, so part of this, I'm going to talk about a few tools that they have for testing. So Ionic came up with this dev app tool, which is really like Ionic View. So it's an app you put on your phone. But the really cool thing is, like what's Corey demoing that application, is this ties to your network. So if your development box and your phone are on the same Wi-Fi network, you can actually test it on your phone on your development box. Whereas before, if you're doing Ionic stuff, you're usually doing most of your testing right here in the workstation in a browser, which is pretty good, but I always run into issues when you go and test on the actual device. So like, I know in my app, I test mostly on Android because I have Android, and my wife has an iPhone. So I finally got around to getting an old iPhone she gave me, and then I ran into all kinds of problems on the iPhone. This makes that much simpler. So now, if you're on the same network, you'll do the build, it'll push it to those devices, and they can actually test. And the other thing that they get is they'll get the console logs right to your desktop, just like you do when you're doing it in the browser, just like Corey was demoing inside the console log. You'll get the same kind of output from your app back in your console log and be able to find those those errors out on the device. So as part of that, trying to get to the device and getting the real testing much quicker. Now, a few things that I think are a drawback with the dev app. It has several native plugins, and at the end of this, I'll give you a list of where you can find out what native plugins are there. But they're not all the native plugins. So, like on the app I have, there's some plugins. I don't think it has the Google and Facebook authentication that I have in my app. I don't think those native plugins are available in there, so I'd have to use like email authentication. But most of the things like camera, video, media are there. But that is one of the problems that I'm hoping they're going to remedy, but they haven't completely fixed that yet. Okay, the other one is Ionic View, which is the one they've had for a while. And that's really useful for beta testing and through like those channels. So you download the Ionic View. Same thing, like when I wanted to test my app today, I got a notice and I loaded my app in Ionic View. So anyone that had Ionic View could test your application without even going to any of the stores yet. So it doesn't even have to be on the Apple Store or on the Android store. Same thing, I think it's a lot easier than Test Flight. But again, one of the limitations is the native plugins. They don't have all the native plugins, but it's still a pretty good way to test probably 90% of your application, and until you get into specific things, that might be one of the issues. So the other thing that I've really liked when I had Ionic Cloud was some of the deployment options. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Easier way to deploy updates. One of the cool things you can have in your application and with the deployment is if you have like bug fixes you have in your application, anything that's HTML, JavaScript, CSS, those kinds of changes can automatically be pushed out to your application, and it can update your application without doing updates to the store. So you don't have to, oh, I've got this stupid bug in a CS file, and it's a pain to put it on the Apple Store. I can just push this up. So, and there's different options of how you can apply those. You can have it so you push them out, and automatically when you launch the app, it just happens in the background. Or it could be automatic, that you'll just get the splash screen and wait until you get the latest update. Or the way we did it was, you have an option on your menu bar, say, do you want to update the app? And that update is available, push it, and then you get the update when the user wants it. So here's the cool part about the Ionic packaging is now in the cloud, you can do native app binary builds for iOS and Android. So all your native plugins, all those things can be built now, and you don't have to have a Mac and run it on Xcode and run those native builds. So that is now available to do in the cloud. Essentially, you generate your credentials. So this is something we could talk about later, but you get all the credentials and the security and the policies that you need on those app stores. You load them into your Ionic dashboard, Ionic Pro dashboard, and then they're there. So now when you want to push to the app stores, you just push deployment, and it will push them to the app stores for you. So you don't have to worry about, a different machine and you forgot your notes or your certificates and you forgot how to do it, or you're on vacation and your buddy doesn't know how to deploy to the app store. Now it's all right there so you can automate it. So from a DevOps perspective, I'm really excited about this. For teams, it makes it a lot easier. For myself, that just kind of works on this on my own, it makes it a lot easier. I always dread having to do another push to the Apple Store because I have to go through all my docs to remember exactly step 1, step 2, step 3. I'm getting better at it. The other cool thing, so I'm going to talk about one of the other features that they have is monitoring solutions. So now if you use the Ionic Pro APIs, number one, you can track your errors. So in your app, if certain errors, like one of the things I've had problems with is authenticating, but when you give it out to your users, And one of the apps I'm writing was like for my kids' ski team. So they may be up in the mountains and have no connectivity, and to them it's just not working. And what it is they don't have any connectivity, so they can't get to the fire base and authenticate and those kinds of things. So I've got to find out some workarounds. What would be nice is I can capture that error and it can send the error back to Ionic, and I can capture these errors and find out what's going on. The other thing is you can map your source code to those errors. So even after you've transpiled the source code and minimized it, you can still put your source maps and attach them to Ionic Pro so that when you get an error, as long as you've matched your versions pretty accurately, you can know exactly where your code is breaking and on what devices they're breaking on. So that's a pretty cool feature.
You said that does work offline?
Well, no, I mean it doesn't work offline, but you could have it in. Like the error would be that it's offline, but you could capture it and store
But
it.
I mean,
So,
it'll capture it while they're offline and then send it to you when they're online?
yeah, if you use the APIs, I mean you'd have to code that. So you capture the error and store the error, and then when it wakes up, you could send it back using those APIs. The other cool thing that I think would be like A/B testing your application when it tests different features. You could just deploy these, and then in the monitor actually get some real-time data on what features people are using and those kinds of things. So here are the basic costs. So a single developer account is $29 a month. That's what's listed. I think I paid $20 because
They have a free tier.
do they still have a free tier? Because I
Yeah.
thought that one was going away.
Hmm.
But I think
It's on the site. They have a free tier. You can only get like 100 live deploys.
Yeah.
It's very limited.
100 like per month.
Is that what it is per month?
So
Yeah.
those are true. That's 10,000 live deploys per month.
Does it?
So define live deploy. What does that mean?
Per
That's-
device. Per device.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you have 10,000 users and you submit an update, like boom, and all 10,000 of them actually ping the server and get the update, that'll hit your max.
Okay.
Yeah. So a team, $50 a month. I guess it doesn't matter how many developers. It's just based on how many downloads you've got in their business. So you can see this is where they're trying to make their money. But I found it pretty helpful, just the savings you get on development time, and especially if you're like a one-person shop working on different mobile devices. It can really help out. So just in summary, it helps. It makes Ionic Pro, I found, makes development much easier, DevOps much easier, deploying to mobile applications easier, distributing to testers. So if you've got a group of testers you want to pass it to, and then the ability to monitor your applications is pretty cool, because once it's out there, it's hard to tell unless you build your own tooling. It's kind of hard to say what's happening if no one's using my app. Well, they can't get past the login page, and you didn't know that. So here's just some future topics and maybe future meetups, because I'm going to keep on working with Ionic Pro. I'm really interested in testing and in a lot of the DevOps stuff. So automated testing, maybe part of the process. Run your continuous integration on your local GitHub, and then automating those builds and pushing those out to Ionic Pro. Probably a demo of showing how you can set this up to really do a full deployment to the Android, the Google Store, and the Apple Store. Some real monitoring examples, and PW hosting is one of the things they're promising is going to be available in Ionic Pro. That's something that Firebase has. Is cool, because like in my app, I have an admin tool, which is an Angular tool, and it's so easy that it just deploys right in Firestore, hosts it right there, so you can access that application right from the Firestore website. I found the documentation was pretty good. So the Ionic Pro documentation, they have some YouTube videos also that explain how it works. The Ionic View plugin support, if you go there, that's what shows like what plugins are available. It's a pretty long list, but not all the native plugins are there. And what I found with Ionic, I think it's great, but the areas I had the biggest problems with are with some of the plugins, where sometimes they're flaky or they work for a while and then you get a new update and it doesn't work. That's my biggest complaint. But the Ionic and the Angular stuff works really well. There's the Ionic blog, you get the latest stuff, and then if you're new to Git, this workflow best practices is a great resource on how to use Git and how a lot of the open source projects use Git. So I think that's it.
Awesome. What kind of questions do you guys have for?
Do you have this for something at work, this personal project you're working on?
So I'm an independent software consultant, so I write my own software, but I spend a lot of time working with the state and helping with their large enterprise apps. So yeah, this is just my own kind of personal project. Like Todd, I wish I could play in Ionic all the time. I enjoy that.
Did you misspell software, or was that just marketing?
No, I misspelled it, sorry. Yeah, I just typed it in. No, bad marketing. I'm a technical.
Palmersoftware.com was taken, so you had to drop the
Yeah,
W.
no, it is really spelled out.
Yeah.
You were talking about the app you developed for your kids' ski team. What do they use it for?
Well, we're still beta testing, but the idea was I'm a parent, and so, and you probably don't, well, you maybe have kids with other athletic teams. Ski teams are a big pain because you're always traveling, and the coaches are on the mountain, and you need to get your kids at certain places. So I wrote this app to be able, for parents to be able to know, the coaches could immediately communicate, hey, we're going to meet here. Who needs rides? So a lot of times it's a lot of carpooling. So it's a kind of a collaboration between coaches, athletes, and parents. And one of the cool features that I used with Firestore was a Slack-like feature. So they have chat boards. So during the day they can hey, we're meeting, team, the U14 athletes are meeting at this particular chairlift at this time, and they get it in real time. Whereas right now, it's a group email to everybody, and you may get it or you may not get it, right? So we're still beta testing that. Some of the things that have been a challenge is connectivity. So oftentimes, 10,000 feet at ski resort, you don't always have good cell service or good connectivity. So I've had to work with some of those things. But overall, it's been fun. Still working on it.
So, just to clarify, Ionic transpiles JavaScript? Is that what it is?
Yeah, well, so it's written in TypeScript. And so Angular
Sure.
comes down to JavaScript. It runs, so essentially Ionic is using the browser in your phone, right?
Okay.
So it's a web app in your phone. Now, I think when we get into stencil and some of the things, then it's getting into components.
Sure.
And browsers being able to take advantage more of native processing and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it builds what's considered hybrid applications. So it's an application, native application in the App Store, but it's all there's
Just wrapped JavaScript.
there's a web
Fair enough.
it's just running in a web view, both on
And-
Android and iOS.
Yeah, and you're finding more. I think the apps that work well with that are like business apps, like I work on a lot. It's performant enough. The native plugins make it so you get to the camera, you get to all the other stuff. But that's one of the things it's not. So you don't have to write. For me, what I like is I don't have to write Objective-C or Swift or
Or
Java.
you can use a common library for all 15 of your clients, like we do at Sling.
Yeah,
So that's nice.
yeah. But I think that's like React Native. I think it can compile down to binary.
And phones are so performant nowadays that you can't, most of the time you can't tell them between
Yeah.
a hybrid and a native. Unless you're doing like a high graphic, app.
Well, when
you
you're
wouldn't
doing
do
with
like a-
Xbox and Roku and some smart TVs, and there's a lot of clients we're targeting.
ARM processors that aren't quite as beefy.
Yeah.
Yeah.